Hello, everyone, and welcome to Low-Code Campfire, December 3rd, episode number 29. While everyone's gathering here, I'll run through the introduction or the setup for this anyway. This is a community gathering. All skill levels are welcome. We get together most every week to show what we're working on, challenges, experiences, and we hope you'll bring something to show and be ready to help with ideas and suggestions. That's really where we see some wonderful value out of this week by week. All the past editions are recorded. There's the link to subscribe to it. It's youtube.com/plantanap. And if you subscribe and set up for notifications, you'll get notifications as we post these episodes and other content. We are in a meeting format, so we say hello if we want to. We'll do first call. We'll talk about, I haven't updated this agenda, but we'll talk about we have some things that are submitted in advance, but it's a meeting format, so jump in and participate. Simple guidelines: mute if you've got noise going on, be nice to each other. I wanted to let you know that when it gets quiet, I've always warned that I'm going to sing, and this is old news. I've moved on to Christmas music, so just warning you about that. All the emails that we send out, plus this link here, you can submit questions and topics in advance, so please do that. That gives us a chance to prepare, or at least get you on the agenda. Sometimes I do some research in advance. And so good morning. I think everyone here has heard that spiel like 29 times. So good morning, all.
Good morning, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Happy Friday. I'm looking forward to some Christmas music.
Not from Dale.
Yeah, I'll play something, but we don't want me to start singing. Okay. Good. I'm going to move right on. A little bit of housekeeping. The Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve, we're not actually going to run a Low-Code Campfire. We're going to be home with our families, so don't count on meeting me here. And then we're into our every week segment. First call. What's going on? Anything that needs to be pushed to the front of the line? No? Okay. Well, we'll start working through my list of things, but it's there were not any. Let's see. Bogdan is going to participate. I see he's not here yet, but we have some new things, some forms and listings, some new design that's coming out in 118, and we have a challenge about. Since grid buttons are in that redesign, those are now listing. So wondering what the right word, for grid buttons are. So I'll let him deal with that if he is able to join us, but we'll circle back to that one. So in the meantime, there's a couple of new contributions to the Campfire website, and so we can jump over there and take a look at those. Of course, I'm not signed in, so it's going to take just a second here. There we go. So since we got together last time, there's been two that were added, both by me. So the first is we had a question some time ago about the extend list properties. It was called something else before that. It was extend entity list or something like that. But how to this feature is a little bit elusive. What does it do, and how can you use it? So I've put a contribution in for that, and we can take a look at that. And then the other one was, we had a question yesterday. It was a really kind of a neat one. That's an easy one, so we'll cover it first. But this is where we have this Google Maps thing, and there's no built-in way to say you want it to be satellite instead of map view. And so I did a little bit of a hack, and this is using techniques that have been talked about here and suggested by others. I think it was a Mark Buellsing thing, where a little bit of JavaScript and to delay, because it takes a while for this to come up, and to delay. And then what I found is that you could locate the satellite button and click it in code, a couple of short things. So if we take a look at that, again, this one's real easy, so I'll bring it up. This is all done in this simple initialization script. So we use a timeout function that gives 2 seconds. That takes a little, you might be able to do it a little shorter, depending on what's on your page. You might want to do it a little longer, but you can adjust that timing. But then I'm locating the button show satellite by title, show satellite imagery, and clicking it. It's real high-tech stuff. And as a result, it comes up one way, but then after a couple seconds, it switches over. So that was a thing that was on the community forum. Thought it was a worthwhile thing to document. Anybody, out of curiosity, anybody using the Google Maps?
Oh yeah, that's my question. So I'm using the Google Map. I will put something in the contributions for that. I have a situation where somebody looks up an address using the what is it? Well, the address search function of the Google. So that's in a text box. After that, after he clicks the button, there comes up the Google Map with that address in place. But then he wants to correct the address by adding a marker to the map.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is here that we have a transportation problem, that a driver must go to a specific place, and the address is not always the accurate place he needs to go. So the client wants to have the possibility to add a marker where the driver should go to instead of the general address. So that was the case. I will put that in contributions, because it's a nice way of dealing with Google Maps and addresses and the like.
Absolutely, very cool. I've used apps like that, and lets you drag the marker around and get it to right where you're standing, which is really quite
yes. That's the idea is that that in the rural countries, the address is often not the correct location, or you have to put your truck on some barn near the address, but that barn, of course, doesn't have an address. So that was the use case here.
Interesting. Yep. Well, and there again, it's one, like you're asking for satellite view, depending on what you're doing. If there's you could very accurately place yourself on the whether it's the right side of the street or in the middle of the road somewhere. You can usually find a landmark looking at it this way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I asked the question, but the real problem, which I found out later, was not so much going to satellite view, but I had a constant security policy in place with blocked the actual images. So we didn't see any images, but that was because of the CSP, not so much switching from map to land to a satellite.
Yep. So I have to tell you, I lost 15 minutes yesterday because Google lets you inside places, and so I had to go explore the White House a little bit. So sometimes your questions send me off to funny places. Okay, so that's that one. And so the extended list properties action, extend list properties.
So before we leave that one, I have a question about it.
Yes, sir, please.
That timeout function, could that, and it's semi-related, does that timeout function, could you run that in a server-side script in one of those, since that's just JavaScript?
Yeah, I don't know. I would assume so, but it just I don't know that much about it, and my strong Radu would be able to tell us, but I don't have that.
I guess I'll do
Why
it.
why would you want to do that in a server-side environment?
Well, not for your application, although the Google Maps one is. I have something that a login problem that seems to be timing out, and I hadn't thought about putting a timeout, or we're not getting properly logged in every time.
So putting in a controlled delay.
Right.
Yeah. I would suspect so. I would suspect there's some way to put in a delay, and whether it's timeout or some other way, something. Usually there's languages have a way of introducing that without going into a high CPU loop or something.
I have read about folks who make SQL Server busy for a second or two. I think that's on the not recommended list, but it kind of depends on how much traffic you have. Is it private to you and all that kind of stuff? But that could be done.
I will admit I've done that myself. Sometimes where there's a lot of stuff being processed, I've put like millisecond or second delays in my SQL loops just to force a delay so that it doesn't punch too much data in at one shot.
Okay. I don't know that I want to do it with SQL, just because there's probably a SQL admin somewhere that would come beat on me, but I was hoping I could do it through the back end. But I'll go play with it. I just hadn't thought of putting a timeout in it to solve this problem or have an effect on this problem.
Well, of course, there are C# functions that do wait or sleep.
There you go, a razor script maybe, or something, and a token.
Yep, and I see wait for. I assume that if there's a true wait for kind of thing, that they would have made it without being made it efficient, CPU efficient. So
Yeah, I use the wait for a lot. It's kind of like what Ben did to stop it and grab data and then use that data, and it works great. I haven't seen any issues yet.
That's exactly what I use, and I've never had any problems with it.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Jim.
Yes, sir.
Jerry here. I've got one last thought. I too am guilty of using SQL to do everything, and but I have at one time in my life used the what do we call it, Dale? The execute JavaScript or run JavaScript and continue execution action, one of those. And I have put timers successfully in there to stall something in between two actions. I'm not sure if that's exactly where you're going, but I've had an action stack where one action was conflicting with the next action, some stuff I was doing. I just need a little bit of a pause in there. And I tried it with the JavaScript and the execute JavaScript action, and that worked fine for me.
Yeah, this one is in a workflow, and I'll have to go see if that's available in the workflow to pause it.
Okay.
I know there's a server-side JavaScript execute, but I like to do everything in SQL if I can, because I'm much better at coding it. So.
yeah, that's my worldview also.
Thanks, Jerry.
You're welcome.
So working with list properties and at the end of the day, this is all about how to manipulate JSON, perhaps outputting subarrays. So my scenario to demonstrate this was if you have invoices and payments and you want to be able to output some JSON that has, here's the invoice and here's the payments related to that. And maybe you're trying to hit a mark that somebody else needs to be able to read your API, and that's the requirement that they have. So rather than doing it in two calls, one for the invoice, one for the payments, that you can interleave them. So I have an invoices page, so 1001 and 1002, two different invoices. And then I haven't spent a lot of time on the interface for this, so bear with me. We have payments that go against the different invoices. So the 1002, the Google invoice, has a couple of payments against it. And so the idea is that you can grab, in this case, it will produce the JSON for just one, or for this one, it'll produce the JSON for all your invoices. And so we can open that up, and I've got the text here. So I'm going to grab that. And then on my page, I found that, I'm using a JSON formatter. So we'll paste that in there and get to see it. So we have the invoice. These are plant and app entities. So we have the Google invoice with two payments, followed by the MR Salons invoice with one payment. And so it's all about returning an array of content within. Ben, I'm not sure. I think this was your original question. Does this sound familiar? Trying to use extend well, the name's changed, so now it's tough to even know. But I think we were trying to figure out what to do with it. And
yes, I think originally it was something I posted. I think I was using it incorrectly because somehow when I was trying to loop through and change the, at the time called entities, now lists, nothing was changing. So I don't know. I personally gave up on it. I moved on and I did it a different way. But you showed me that I remember correctly when I looked at your stuff, I was doing something wrong with it.
Right. Well, and that's the thing. It's if we, let's see if I can find this again now. Look at the code here. The code for my button, I think, is probably using a workflow. So let's see. My download all details. So I'm executing this workflow sample payment JSON for invoices, and I'm passing and I'm getting back the payment JSON. So this is the one that I want to call up this this workflow. So let's go find that configuration. There it is. Not too many here, so not too hard to find. But this is it's a little bit of a goofy action that has some pretty unusual requirements that you don't. It's hard to discern that you need this. We're working on fixing, excuse me, the documentation. So the idea is you're looping through the invoices and you want to go get the payments. And so my results list is the invoice list that we're going to output. We're going to read all the payments and create a list. And then the extend list properties is the thing that's going to attach this list that gets created to my original list. And so if we look at the extend list properties, we're going to add up payments, and just flipping back here, this is the payments thing here. That's where we're adding it. So we're adding a payments property and we are connecting a list to it. So the weird thing, and the reason that you have a hard time making it work, is that if we work through this, so we read our invoice payments and we're outputting payments. When you create a list from JSON that includes that, if you just create something called payment list without any uniqueness added onto it, which is what I'm doing here with this index, that thing only in the context of running through this loop, only the last one exists. And so if you had 10 invoices with 10 different payment things, what you'd find is that the last payments that you attached would be attached to all of them, because they're not unique at the time that you're accessing them. It's really weird. So the idea is you have to create a unique list, which I'm adding on the looping. I'm looping through results list here is the list I'm looping through, and it produces a thing called $index. So the first one is 0, the next one is 1. I'm just using it for uniqueness. So when I create the payment list, I create a unique one, and then when I attach it, I attach the unique name. And so at the time that I connect all these, by doing it that way, each individual list exists at the time that you're manipulating you're extending the original list, and it works. So it's just kind of one of those weird ones, and that's why I had to go to the developers to tell me, okay, now what's going on here. And so hopefully that will make sense. But at the end of the day, if you don't give this any starting or ending invoice numbers, it produces that JSON.
Dale.
Yes.
That's absolutely brilliant. I have been where this question has been 1,000 times in my life, trying to nest listing through entities and build nested JSON arrays and stuff. I finally gave up and went to SQL Server and found it to be so much more pleasant. But that's absolutely amazing. I'm not sure. Probably everybody on this call will get it, but that's some pretty high-tech stuff there, how you indexed each one of those and then called it back and added a property to it. And hey, if it works, it works. That's awesome. I'm not sure how you'll document that for most people, but good luck.
It's a by reference kind of thing. That's the problem.
Yeah, it's really old school, and I get that. I love it. I commend you and whoever for figuring that one out.
Well, yeah, Christy gave me the thing, and then I'm trying to translate that into a real world scenario like invoices and payments was my contribution to this. And then the fact that it's there, at least if you know that you have the problem, you're trying to nest JSON, that you can, through Campfire, come in and take a look at what's
right
there.
on. Well, that's fantastic. I don't want to send you down a rabbit hole or go too far off this topic, but I've had a question for 1,000 years. Would you click on the loop through results list and pull that action up and let me ask a question? And if it's too long-winded, don't. The property called context behavior.
Yep.
Do you have working knowledge of how exactly those 3 options think? I have yet to figure it out completely.
Well, exact is more than you can hope for from me. I have a general idea. So if a token doesn't exist before you get into, and this is my understanding, okay, I mean, I wouldn't swear to it in court, but if a token doesn't exist at the time that you start down this loop, then don't save iteration tokens anything that you modify, the context tokens that get created in the middle of this don't get saved. So if you have some that exist and you modify those, they're going to get modified. If they don't exist and you use the don't save iteration tokens, they won't be saved at the end. So then this one, update all tokens in the original context, would mean that even if something didn't exist prior to coming into this execute actions, that it will get created, and the last value after all the loops are done, it will exist. That's the theory.
So
the difference between these two, I update the tokens and update all tokens. Now I'm not certain, but that's the general direction that these take.
well, I don't feel so bad about not completely understanding it, but if you chose none of the above, do you have any idea which one would be the default? Or is that yet a fourth choice? Because I noticed in this particular example for you, you have nothing selected, which is pretty much how I do everything.
Right, because I'm not, you're not relying on it. I don't know which one it is.
Okay.
It defaults to, again, because the part where tokens that are pre-existing before you get in here get updated, it really doesn't matter, right? If you declare the variable in advance, you're going to get it on the output. We could test, but
Yeah, and we don't need to spend all day on that, but I think probably most of the people that are watching today have experienced this at least once in their life, where you load an entity or a list or whatever we now call it. It's going to take us a while to get through this terminology. We're all going to be talking in weird languages for a while. But if you were to load an entity with a SQL query, then your goal is to spin through that SQL query, so to speak, spin through the entity and perform some actions, much like a cursor would work in SQL Server. That's pretty much been the big thing I have used it for. And I found my results seem to work fine if I just leave the context behavior alone. But one day I accidentally set it to something. I do not remember which one. And I started getting duplicate entries and separate runs. It just went crazy on me. So it freaked me out. And I've never really found anybody to explain to me how those three options work. So for now, I'll leave it alone and I just leave it blank and spin through.
So, I think the place where this becomes useful is if you have some things that are undeclared within the loop. Every loop through, they're going to be blank. Right, so you're kind of so it lets you implicitly initialize the things you're using within this loop. I find it just as easy to explicitly initialize them so that I don't have to count on what the behavior of the looping mechanism is. And okay, and now Mark has posted to everyone what that's about.
Yeah, and I have probably read that before. It was probably just as disillusioned as I am now.
So, continuing to chase the next rabbit, you mentioned create lists from SQL, and the old behavior, the default behavior of this when you load SQL is to add, it adds, right? We'll have multiple, if you have one in every iteration, it adds content to the list, if assuming it's the same list name. So this clear before loading thwarts that default behavior, which is kind of what I would have expected to be the default anyway, but it's not. So anyway, just want to point out clear before loading exists. That was a new feature. Last couple of versions. Okay. Anything else before we move on from that one? So we had Google Maps, extend list properties. Oh, on extend list properties, there's a similar one. So now I should have done that. I haven't documented it, but it's worth a mention here. No. So in our lists and objects, all the renamed things that we have, we are working with extend list properties. That's the one that we're talking about, right? And so this is essentially letting you attach an array of information, even if it's only 0 or 1 or many. It's attaching an array to your JSON. Extend object properties is where you have a subordinate JSON, but it's not an array, it's just a single item. So this works in the same way. It's still by reference, so you have to use it with that dollar index or some uniqueness added on, and it ends up resulting in a JSON that has a sub-level, like, a brand might have, a brand of vehicle might have certain attributes and color and whatever, color and engine size or whatever. But it's not an array. And this again is just, if you're trying to hit a particular mark of JSON that somebody else is requiring, and you have to have a subordinate item that's not an array, this is the thing you use: object list, object properties, and then so you take your object and attach it to your list. So anyway, so here's your original object, and you connect an object. Anyway, it's a similar but different, and I didn't do an example of it. Hope that was more useful than confusing. So that's contributions. So next topic that I was bringing to the table was documenting low code. We are internally working on what's the best way to document low code, putting together our best practices from the projects that we've been working on, considering how we can modify the product to make it better to do internal documentation, and perhaps ultimate goal of generating useful documentation with features like having that documentation make it into the Git repository, so that you have differences between what you changed and before version, after version, and just kind of have that happen automatically. But I was wondering what things you do already, how you document low code, or do you have a need for it?
I'll be the first to say it's needed. I think not too many people would disagree. I don't have a good way of doing it just yet, so this is right on time.
Perfect.
I mean, me personally, I just document it in the description lines of my actions, or because I work quite extensively in SQL, I document my SQL.
Okay.
Yeah, I document the SQL, I document the JavaScript that I write, but I think that's not enough for me going into the future. Like if I write a workflow, I want to make some notes about what the workflow does and what my thought process was behind it. Sometimes I want to record that. Also, I want to record things like where do I think this workflow could be improved when I have more time. So they're kind of like metadata about the workflow that I would like to be recording.
I'm putting stuff into a text or a Word document, but where I always my documentation breaks down when I go look at a workflow or something like that is finding that document. It'd be really nice to have in like the workflow designer or something, a little documentation button that would just let me pop up a file someplace that has my notes in it. So I just keep them in one place.
Right. I had a similar thought. I thought that the place for my documentation would be in the workflow. If I open it up, maybe there could be a panel I could expand that my notes would be there, right there in the workflow.
Yep. So I've been working on a new service desk system. Actually, I worked on it several months ago, and then I come back to it and find that the information that I left behind really wasn't enough for me. And so now I'm going back through and documenting it. And okay, I'm going to back up. There's this I always like to think of things as a continuum of, at the very low level, there is a low code, something that, it's an entity. It would be, it's almost self-documenting, right? It's so uncomplex that wasting time on documentation is useless. And all the way on the other end of the spectrum is enterprise level systems where 5 people worked on it. And then and as Mark points out, the idea that, what were we thinking? What was the basis behind that particular area of the program? And, you're going to come back to it and maintain it. It has to be maintainable year over year. So within that continuum, I'm trying to, this is where I'm thinking. And so coming back to this application and realizing that I didn't do a great job of documenting, I'm trying to kind of come up with my own best practices, and hopefully that will feed into that, and your ideas will feed into what we're doing within the product. But yeah, I would like to see things within the product. One thing I'm doing at this point, because there's not a whole bunch of it within the product, is the same idea that you guys were talking about, using, everything can have what is this? It's a comment. So anything that you put on this shape, you can add a comment to it, and it doesn't impact the way that the process runs. So for me, I'm putting documentation into a Google Doc, and then at least I've got it here. It's not hyperlinked, so that's unfortunate, but at least I can get there to it. And so that takes me directly to the spot in the document. There's another thing that that I have done, and something similar to this might find its way into the product, which is I added a custom action called documentation. And this is nothing more than a template. We've talked about adding templates to the product before. It's a template that does nothing, a action that does nothing, but it opens up a documentation with a editor that you can add hyperlinks and add content. And it's a no-op kind of an action, and the condition doesn't matter, or the error message doesn't do anything. It's just documentation. So you can do that, and it would save.
That's a good idea, Dale. I like that. Oftentimes I'm working on a workflow and I have a thought and I want to put it in line, and I'm going to come back to it in a few minutes, but I want it to be there. That could hold its place. That's one way I would use it.
Yep. And so, for example, if I were to save this logic, this, the built-in mechanisms it saves this as part of the HTML. It's exportable, transportable. And my hope then is that if we were to do something like this, and you wanted to do some inline documentation, that our overall documentation mechanism, the long-term thing where we build a documentation, would pick up all these documentation items and assemble them into, you know, a PDF, for example, of what this workflow does or what this system does. But you know, for example, having something here that is more voluminous, explaining what a workflow does or what the ideas were behind it. Other things that were, I'm going to get rid of this since it's useless. Other things that we're kicking around, for example, within entities, to be able to have a general documentation of what that entity is about. And then within properties, we're finding that people are trying to have extended name of the property to better define what the thing is, and really that definition should be a separate thing. So that may become a column in this listing, that so the status could be called status, and then explaining what the status is about or used for, or what was in mind at development would be a separate piece of information.
I like it.
Another thing that we kicked around is the idea of where are things used. You know, this workflow, where is it used in other workflows, or in, and you know, I know Ben has tools, right? But where is it used in forms and grids and whatever?
I smile because yes, I do.
Yes.
Yeah. The rest of us mere mortals don't have that.
Well, you do, Mark. I think I shared it with you. The code
Yeah,
search.
I haven't spun it up yet though. But yeah, I mean, I was just looking at your workflow, Dale, and I was remembering, you know, I've got some workflows that I know I copied and then improved, and then copied the whole workflow and then improved it. And now, you know, I would really like to know if one of my previous versions is still being tied in and being used somewhere, so that I could go switch it up to the new one. And
Yep.
I don't know how to find that information until I fire out Ben's tricky tool.
Yep, and you know, that's a perfect example. If you modify a workflow, for example, to do an additional input or an additional output, you're going to want to find out where that is used, and make sure you think through those implications, not
Definitely.
just take the defaults and cross your fingers.
Which is why I make a new one, because I don't want to mess up an existing use of it. Yeah.
Yep. As far as I know, and I'm not advocating. I like what you're talking about, making a copy and fixing it. But as long as you make a new input that's not required, or a new output, and leave the other outputs alone, so long as it doesn't need to provide those or consume those, it'll run. You can have experience separate from that. I mean, you can get away with modifying it, but making a new copy is probably a better answer. Okay.
That's good stuff you're thinking about with the documentation.
Well, so if nothing else, again, I think I had hoped, I think that was a topic that Bogdan wanted to cover. So we've talked about it. If it gets your mental juices flowing and you have more thoughts on that, we can take it up at another one. And but this is something we want to do well, and you know, from a whether it's in line, which would be helpful, or being able to provide a document that you can hand off to somebody else. That's kind of where we want to go. There's also thoughts about security too, being able to say, well, what security is in effect, and to be able to assist in a bigger company with auditing. So that's what we're up to. that's the topics that I'd set aside for today. So this is the part where you come up with something or we end early.
So if nobody else has a topic, Dale, I do have an update for you on that token problem.
Please.
I found the offending token that was breaking. That the problem for everybody else was that after a restart of my system, my token interface wasn't working. And we thought it was the last token that I had edited was just bad, and it turned out not to be. Turns out that if you create a workflow token and then go delete the workflow, you cannot, the token interface will not load, the token editing. So in my getting ready to move to production and doing, oh, I got to clean some of these old workflows up, that I said, I don't need this anymore. Let me get rid of this so I don't move it to production and stuff. I broke it.
Well, good for you for discovering that. That sounds like a bug I should write up when we get done today.
Yeah. And I've been able to, it doesn't show up. What was weird in our case when we were, because I put a ticket in for Dale, and was I hadn't restarted my server for, a few hours after doing that cleanup. And it doesn't show up until the app restarts again the next time. So.
Right. So it's there's a little bit of cause and effect. You've done it. You changed it before, and it doesn't come into effect till later. And in the same way, when you fix it, it doesn't probably doesn't fix until you restart the server.
Until you restart.
Because we cache that stuff. So
yeah, so I spent a bunch of time looking for what I thought was, why is this token I changed breaking something? And it had nothing to do with that token.
Thanks for sharing that. That's good to know. Sorry you had to do that.
It was okay. It was just like, other than help me understand the product better, actually looking at the inside of it a little bit.
Okay, so I have another thing, a brief topic. So I've got this little list of things I notice as I work there throughout my day. They're in the category of product suggestions, but I'm going to ration them. I'm only going to give you one per Friday, because otherwise I don't think you'd want to talk to me. So the one I have today, on the topic of workflows, because I'm still fresh at workflows, I see errors in my workflow. When I try to test and run and all that, save and test, oftentimes for me, the error message that pops up at the bottom of the workflow is the box that it lives in is too short. And I can't see the whole error message. And then some text is superimposed on the top of the error message that I'm trying to read. So it's a little bit garbled. And I've had to highlight the whole thing, copy it, and go over to the notepad and paste it so I could read it. Because I couldn't read it right there in the workflow. So, there's something going on with the little panel that the error message shows in, that it's superimposed and too small. So I just thought I'd say, hey, it'd be great if that were just bigger. I mean, another thing is I could maybe not have errors, but, I don't know how soon that's going to be.
So I'm going to say that your timing for your feature request of the week is very good. I know that we're working on improving the interface in a variety of ways. So that sounds like something that should be on someone's list. I'll make sure that Bogdan, he's here now. So, but I'll put it on the list for him to look at and see if the product team can do something better in that regard.
Awesome, thanks.
And hopefully we'll have a feature request section soon on the community portal. So that will be good to consolidate everything there.
It's coming. It's in the works.
So Bogdan, I didn't see at what point you slipped in. We were talking about documentation and.
Yeah, I heard the entire discussion.
Oh, good. All right, good. There was, let me back up here. This one, I don't know if you have time to, if you still want to take the time to show your forms and listings new design, and then we're going to take up the question of renaming what to call grid buttons. Are they root buttons or overall buttons, or somebody has a better better name? Here's your opportunity to provide direct input into the product.
Yes, so you know, we've always called them grid buttons, but in the beginning it was a grid, you know, it was a data table. But as we moved on to create other templates and people created their own templates, so it's no longer a grid button. It could be a calendar button, it could be a listing button or a card button, you know. So then we were trying to think what could be a more generic or better name for grid buttons. And I mean, we are now at root buttons. We don't like it, but we didn't find anything that will be more accurate.
If no one else has
List button
something to
is
say.
different something. You have item buttons, that's clear, but you could also call them list button or something like that.
I would like to avoid the word list or listings
For entity.
or entities, because we now have actions called lists that replaced entities. I don't want to use the word list or listing anywhere else, because now we're recreating that problem of entities from before.
Mm-hmm.
Which
Oh, I thought you had a brilliant suggestion, and that was your introduction to that. You're just throwing shade on.
Personally, I'm used to it. I don't, you know, I'm one of those people. If it's not broken, don't fix it. I'm fine with calling them grid buttons. I know it as an action grid, and it just makes sense.
are these the buttons on a row in the grid, or the buttons at the top of the grid?
Yeah,
The buttons
top
at
and
the
bottom.
top. Yeah. Those ones, I think item buttons is still a good name, right?
Item. Well, global or
Possibly master buttons.
overall group.
Is it back in fashion? I remember that a couple of months ago, there was a big thing about calling things master.
Yeah.
How about a module button?
Hey,
So it relates to the grid module that you're adding to a page.
My final selection is just button itself. You're just going to put a button on it. And that button is global. It's the root, it's the master, it's overall. It reacts to everything. And then your item buttons, leave those alone.
could be. Yeah, that's good. A top button or bottom button. A button.
You're just going to put a button on the page, and whatever you do, it's up to you at that point.
Okay, so the feedback form is there. If anybody has if you wake up tonight at 3 in the morning and you have the perfect answer, let us know. Bogdan, did you want to take a look at, or I could bring up the new interface for forms and listings?
Yeah, I can bring it up.
Real quick, before you jump on that, I just have a quick question. If anyone has an answer to this, does anyone know of a surefire way to erase a query string parameter from a URL? Not leaving it there and giving it a blank value, like removing it.
Yeah, there's a line of jQuery that'll suck it right out of the URL. I've got the code pretty handy. I can zip it over to you after the meeting.
Is that the one that you have on your website?
Probably yes. Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's cosmetic
Explain.
because I've found that if you load a page with the query string and then use that code that you have posted, grids still see the old query string value. Even though you clear it using that code, grids will not notice that that value has been removed.
If it's
Okay.
watching the URL, it doesn't notice it.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
In
but
the URL, it vanishes, but the grids still think it's there.
in that case, you have to do it server side on pre-render or something like that. It's, you must do it before the JavaScript kicks in.
Can you reinitialize the grid after you remove the parameter?
That's what I was doing. I was doing the DNN, the API action grid refresh after I used the that command that you had in there. I'm looking it up right now. Let me see, what was it that you had over here? Clear, execute. You had a window history push state.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, it on the URL, it looks like it does clear out all of the query string parameters. But like I said, even after doing an action grid refresh, the grid still sees the previous query string value.
I don't remember experiencing that problem, but yeah, maybe.
Yeah, I think you should do it somewhere in the pipeline, because you're right by saying if you do that, it's still somewhere there. So if you can do it through a token, for instance, change a request or something, it might, and then I'm not sure where, but you should do it early in before it lands the page.
Yeah, unfortunately, that defeats the purpose. I have it on the page. I don't want to have to reload the entire page. I just want to
No.
clear it out.
Sure, but you should use Razor or C# or something.
All right, I'll take a look. Thanks, everyone.
Can you set it to blank before you remove it? So set it to blank, initialize the grid, and then remove it?
Yeah, I use Mark's push state to clear it out, and then I have the action grid refresh.
Yeah, but you're saying that the value remains, right?
Right, that's if the page loaded with the query strings already present. If you loaded the page with no query strings, were manipulating the query strings using, update query string param, and then use push state to clear it, that works perfectly fine. But if you came into the page with a query string present in the URL and try to do the push state clear and refresh the grid, won't work.
Yeah, I was saying if you were to use an update query string to put it to a blank value,
that works.
right?
But
And so
it stays up in the URL.
Right, but I'm saying do that to get the functionality and then follow it up with removing it from the URL.
Which would clean it up.
Okay, so like a double clear.
That's my suggestion. I don't know if it's.
I could try that.
Also, let me share my screen because maybe this adds to this. There were some APIs added recently. So I'm not sure if they do something in addition, but I see something like clear grid query string, which might help reset grid internally. So I'm not sure if maybe it's worth looking at.
Thank you.
So where is this page of notes you're reading?
Mhm.
So this page is, I mean, this is the new interface, but it lives under general settings. So this is the new interface. So we
Okay,
move things a bit around a bit. But at the bottom of the general settings that you already have, at the bottom should be these four things, and the last one is JavaScript APIs.
Thank you.
Is that a new clear grid query string? Is that new, or has that been existing for a while?
I think it's new. I think it's 117.
Good. Thanks.
Mhm. And I think some additional APIs might come in 118 as well regarding this, so might be even more helpful.
Okay, with that, we've made it to the top of our hour. So let's put off anything else till next time.
Sounds good.
So next time is next Friday, 10 a.m. And we just appreciate you guys. Whoops, I thought I was showing stuff and I'm not. Next Friday, 10 a.m. And we just appreciate you guys in the spirit of getting together every week and helping us inform what the product needs to be and how you're using it and helping each other. It's a great deal.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you. See you next week.
Great meeting. Hey, good to see you guys. Have a good weekend.